Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, tariffs on both Mexico and Canada put on hold. President Trump pausing the tariffs after both countries agree to work harder to stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. What specific steps the countries are promising and what's next in Trump's negotiations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio working to stem Chinese Communist Party influence in Panama and Central America. Panama making strides to do so. Now, President Trump suggests taking back control of the Panama Canal, not ruling out the use of force. Elon Musk announces plans to shut down USAID after a weekend blackout. What's behind the controversy? NTD's Jason Blair has the details. Several Trump nominees yet to be confirmed, and House lawmakers are still not settled on their massive bill packed with GOP priorities. Instead, moving smaller bills to address fentanyl and energy production. What to expect in Congress this week. And recovery efforts continue near Reagan National Airport following the recent aircraft crash in the Potomac River. Officials provided updates on the removal of wreckage and the recovery of remains.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump announcing a 30-day pause on his tariffs on Canada and Mexico hours before they're set to go into effect. In return, the two countries will send more money and personnel to help stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What is the latest announcement by President Trump?
Good evening to you as well. So tonight, President Trump announced that he's also secured a similar deal that he secured with Mexico, now with Canada. So he's saying that he will issue a 30-day pause of his imminent tariffs to Canadian goods, which were supposed to be 25% on most of his goods, going into effect tonight. And now, in exchange for the pause, the Canadian Prime Minister announced that he will ramp up border security by placing heavy investments and placing a lot of personnel on the border, which include, he says in a post, nearly 10,000 frontline personnel working to protect the border, and appointing a new fentanyl czar, listing cartels as terrorists, launching a Canadian-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. And he also signed a new intel directive to fight organized crime and fentanyl, backing it with $200 million. And this comes after President Trump today had two calls with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. While Trump says he's pleased with the initial outcome, he says he still has to see if a final economic deal can be struck with Canada. And earlier today, Trump again said that he wanted Canada to be a 51st state.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protections. We don't need them for the cars. We don't need them for lumber. We don't need them for anything. If people wanted to play the game right, it would be 100% certain that they'd become a state.
And earlier today, President Trump also announced a similar deal with the Mexican leader. He will pause his tariffs on Mexican goods for 25% as well. Now for 30 days, it will not go into effect. And in exchange, Mexico will place 10,000 National Guard troops at its border to help stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. Meanwhile, Trump also mentioned that these tariffs are still on the table as the two sides continue to negotiate over the month-long period. Meanwhile, on concerns about if the tariffs could raise costs for everyday Americans, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt came out to brief us today, saying that while President Trump, of course, is making a lot of moves to lower the cost for everyday Americans, is also emphasizing that American lives are expensive as well. Watch.
I think for those of us who have children, there's not enough money in the world to bring back the lives that have been lost because of the illegal drug and border crisis. And the president is committed to ensuring that Canada and Mexico and China understand that the United States is not going to be a dumping ground for illegal fentanyl that is killing young people in this country.
Meanwhile, Trump has also announced a 10% tariffs on Chinese goods, and so far the two sides have not struck a deal to pause that. And earlier today, in the Oval Office, while signing executive orders, and President Trump as well mentioned a big cost that China has imposed on not just the U.S. but honestly on all countries in the world by letting COVID get unleashed and spread around the world. Trump says that's probably at least $60 trillion when it comes to the economic damage and, quote, infinite number the damage done. Also quoting, he says, the lives that were lost, the damage that was incurred. And meanwhile, Trump has also said that if they cannot make a deal with China, quote, then the tariffs will be very, very substantial. On this specific topic, we know that President Trump is calling on China to stop letting its fentanyl, as well as the precursors that fentanyl is used to make fentanyl, to stop those flowing from the China, of course, different Chinese companies all the way to Mexico and Canada, ultimately to the U.S. Peter Navarro also talked to us at the White House today, saying that China is letting those materials out, and a small glass of it can kill millions of Americans. So far, we're still waiting to see if any breakthrough or progress will be made between U.S. and China when it comes to that initiative, and President Trump says he will be talking to the Chinese regime leader very soon. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. Secretary of State Marco Rubio tells the Panamanian president to reduce influence by the Chinese regime or face U.S. action. This as President Trump suggests the U.S. will take back control of the Panama Canal and doesn't rule out the use of force. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
President Trump suggests that the U.S. could take back control of the Panama Canal by force. That's as he says Panama has violated its treaty keeping the Panama Canal neutral, letting control over this critical waterway fall into the hands of the Chinese regime.
We either want it back or we're going to get something very strong or we're going to take it back. And China will be dealt with. And we didn't give that to China, we gave it to Panama. We shouldn't have given it to Panama, but Panama, as you know, has violated the agreement, totally violated the agreement. So that's in the process right now, but they did have a very good meeting with the head of Panama.
The U.S. government built and operated the canal in the early 20th century. Under President Jimmy Carter, control of this waterway was handed over to the Panamanian government on the condition that it remain neutral. However, the Chinese Communist Party leases the main entry and exit points of the Panama Canal. This puts the CCP in a position to cut off nearly half of U.S. trade. The Panamanian president opposes the U.S. taking back control of the canal, but after Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with him, Panama said that it will no longer renew its Belt and Road contracts with China. Belt and Road is a series of infrastructure projects that China runs, but it saddles many of these countries in billions in debt and Chinese military occupation. Rubio's trip comes also with an effort to end mass illegal immigration. Last year, the U.S. and Panamanian government signed an agreement to stem the surge of illegal immigrants along the Darien Gap. Here's Rubio in Panama.
This is an effective way to stem the flow of illegal migration, of mass migration, which is destructive and destabilizing. And it would have been impossible to do without the strong partnership we have here with our friends and allies in Panama, and we're going to continue to do it, and we're grateful for it.
To further illustrate China's influence in the region, China also has a Confucius Institute in Panama. Now, this is a CCP-funded educational program used to spread Chinese propaganda. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Department of Government Efficiency has called on NPR and PBS to testify before Congress. A House subcommittee is alleging that the two news outlets have pushed biased coverage despite receiving tax dollars as part of their funding. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the story.
A Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge, subcommittee is calling on the CEOs of NPR and PBS to testify. The subcommittee chair, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene, says that NPR and PBS receive tax dollars to stay on the air, and their coverage should serve every single American, not just a narrow slice of like-minded individuals and ideological interest groups. The official notices to the federally funded TV and radio organizations say that the subcommittee seeks to better understand NPR and PBS's, quote, position on providing Americans with accurate information. The hearings are proposed to be sometime during the first or fourth week in March. So far, neither CEO has responded to the calls. Doge, which is headed by Elon Musk, is tasked with increasing efficiency with taxpayer money, reducing waste, and streamlining federal government operations. Last week, Doge said that it canceled 104 DEI-related contracts across multiple federal agencies, saving over $1 billion. Recently, Doge has been reviewing USAID. The Foreign Aid and Development Agency's website went dark over the weekend. Musk said earlier Monday that he spoke with President Trump and said USAID will be shut down.
What we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a ball of worms. If you've got an apple and it's got a worm in it, maybe you can take the worm out. But if you've got actually just a ball of worms, it's hopeless.
Trump told reporters on Sunday that USAID has a radical agenda. And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that Musk is a special government employee. She said, "I can also confirm that he has abided by all applicable federal laws." Some Democrats are expressing concern over Musk and Doge, alleging that the department has acted illegally, and also raising national security concerns since Doge has been granted access to sensitive Treasury systems.
Elon Musk, you may have illegally seized power over the financial payment systems of the United States Department of Treasury, but you don't control the money of the American people. The United States Congress does that.
Musk and his band of unelected acolytes at Doge have locked out USAID employees from their offices, improperly accessed highly classified information, purged the agency of its nonpartisan leadership, and thrown the agency into chaos.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt highlighted some USAID spending that she calls wasteful. Here's what she said to reporters today.
$1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
The White House called them the top 4 most insane priorities of the USAID and said American taxpayers don't want their money going to such initiatives. House Republicans have yet to unveil their massive bill packed with GOP priorities on border, energy, and tax policies. In the meantime, lawmakers will address American energy production and the fentanyl crisis as President Trump's nominees continue to work their way through the confirmation process. NTD's Melina Weiskup has a look ahead for the week.
On the heels of their conference retreat, House Republicans returned to Capitol Hill this week to pass bills related to fentanyl and American energy. The Halt Fentanyl Act would permanently classify fentanyl-related substances as Schedule I drugs, making it on par with heroin and methamphetamine. A strong bipartisan vote passed the bill through the House in the last Congress, but it stalled in the Senate. Now Republicans will pass it again, with hopes that their new Republican trifecta will get it to the White House. They'll also push a bill this week to prevent a ban on fracking. This comes as Republicans are still short of details for their massive bill that would be stuffed with major policy changes on energy, taxes, and immigration. But the House Speaker told reporters they're getting closer.
We'll be voting on that by late February, and that will keep us on the aggressive schedule that has been set out to make sure we accomplish this mission.
Meanwhile, over in the Senate, confirmations are still underway. Senators will start this week voting on Christopher Wright as the Energy Secretary and Doug Collins as the VA Secretary. Later, Trump's Attorney General pick, Pam Bondi, will get a final vote in the Senate. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
A federal judge today extends a block on the Trump administration's spending freeze, rejecting arguments from the Justice Department that the case had become moot. Biden-appointed Judge Lauren Alican had expressed concern during a hearing. She said the administration is continuing its freeze on all federal spending, despite 2 court orders issued last week to block it. The The White House Office of Management and Budget rescinded a memo detailing the freeze, but Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that the freeze is ongoing. Alican said some nonprofits are still not able to access promised funding despite the rescindment of the memo. She granted a request from a coalition of nonprofit groups for a temporary restraining order. The ACLU today filed a complaint against the Trump administration on behalf of immigration rights advocates. They claim a proclamation that shuts down asylum seeking at the border is unjustified. The ACLU, which provides legal services to asylum seekers, argues the proclamation falsely cites an invasion as the reason to deny asylum protections, and that these protections are granted by Congress. The complaint states that without them, families and individuals are at risk of persecution with no recourse. President Trump issued the proclamation on Inauguration Day to guarantee the state's protection against invasion. It states that aliens engaged in the invasion would be restricted from invoking provisions of the Immigration Nationality Act. Recovery efforts are underway near Reagan National Airport following the mid-air plane collision near Washington, D.C. This afternoon, the Army Corps of Engineers began lifting the wreckage of the American Airlines passenger plane from the Potomac River, and officials provided an update on remains recovery.
The first of the two engines was removed at about 10 o'clock this morning. Shortly after that, about noon, we had the fuselage out of the water. And then about 2:30 this afternoon, we began our salvage operations to begin to bring the wing out of the water. Those were our goals for today, the fuselage, the engine, and the wing.
So far, officials have recovered the remains of 55 victims. Additional remains are recovered today and are being identified by the D.C. medical examiner. Assistant Fire Chief Gary Steen said he believes the remaining human remains are still within the wreckage. Over the next 24 hours, officials aim to complete the recovery of the civilian plane, focusing on the cockpit, though strong winds may slow their progress. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers plans to remove the jet's remains from the river in stages over the next 3 days. After that, recovery teams will focus on the Black Hawk helicopter, with debris clearance expected to continue until at least February 12th. And now to Philadelphia, where business owners and customers returned to the site of the plane crash near Roosevelt Mall. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on the community impact after tragedy rattled the city.
Retired teacher Susan Wolf visited the Philly pretzel factory Sunday to support the business. The 54-year-old was pretty shaken by last week's plane crash.
It's scary. I mean, the mall has been there. I've lived in this neighborhood my entire life. I'm 54 years old, so this is my neighborhood. And to know that it was so close to the mall and all the new stores that came into the mall recently in the last few years, and it's just so sad.
Marinucci's deli owner Andrew Doherty recalls hearing the crash.
So we heard it. We heard a loud bang. We didn't know what it was. Maybe a car accident, something like that. And we went outside and saw the smoke cloud, and the building shook a little bit. The doors were popped open from the blast.
A quarter-mile area was still closed off to the public. Doherty said he was worried about his community.
There's 20 or 30 businesses that lost they probably won't reopen. And we are thankful because we're in the spot, but again, we're tragically sad for what happened in our neighborhood.
Doherty added he hoped the local community would come together to help those who lost their livelihoods. At least 7 people died when a medevac plane crashed near the shopping center Friday. 19 people were injured. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Coming up, with tensions rising over U.S.-EU tariffs, Britain is caught in the middle. Will it be forced to choose between the two key allies? Malcolm Hudson reports from London. People gathered in Israel to thank President Trump for helping get hostages released. This comes as talks for phase 2 of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas are set to begin today. Jason Perry reports. And President Trump wants Ukraine to come up with a financial guarantee for the money the U.S. has sent. That's as NATO admits it can't defend Europe without help from the U.S. Arian Pasdar has the Ukraine update when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Britain will not choose between the European Union and the United States. The EU is due to be hit with tariffs, but President Trump has suggested that Britain may avoid them. There have been concerns that this difference could force Britain to choose between allies. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us from London.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer insisted Britain will stay resolute in its commitment to working with both the European Union and the United States. This comes after President Trump said he'll impose tariffs on the EU, but suggested Britain might escape this. Speaking in Brussels, Starmer said it's really important the UK works with both allies.
Both of these relations are very important to us. We are not choosing between them, but that's historically been the position of the UK for many, many decades now.
Starmer has been seeking to reset relations with the EU in the post-Brexit era. However, concerns are growing that Trump's proposed tariffs could force Britain to pick sides. On Sunday, Trump said the EU will definitely face tariffs due to its trade imbalance with the US, but suggested the UK might be able to secure a trade deal.
So the UK is way out of line, and we'll say the UK, but European Union is really out of line. UK is out of line, but I'm sure I think that one can be worked out.
Trump said he and Starmer get along very well. Starmer's official spokesman said he looks forward to working with Trump to deepen trade, investment, security and defense relations. During his recent trip to Brussels, Starmer met with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. Rutte was asked about the ongoing dispute over Greenland after Trump expressed interest in having the US buy the territory from Denmark. Rutte said there has been something very useful about Trump's move here.
President Trump alerted us to the fact that when it comes to the High North, there is a geopolitical and strategic issue at stake. I would say that it's not only about Greenland. This has to do with Finland, it has to do with Sweden, Norway, Iceland, yes, Greenland, and therefore Denmark, also Canada and also the US.
Trump in January said controlling Greenland is necessary for the free world. It comes amid concerns that the Chinese regime is stepping up efforts to bolster commercial and military capabilities in the Arctic. Rutte said that NATO is looking at the best way to make sure to tackle those challenges. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Now over to South Africa, where a civil society group today backed President Trump's threat to cut aid to the country. But the group urged the president to target the country's politicians rather than its people.
Punish the politicians that are pushing destructive policies. Do not blanket punish the country. And we'll see where that goes. It's now still early days. We'll see what the investigation that Trump has announced concludes and what it finds. But AfriForum's stance is punish the politicians, not the citizens.
AfriForum is an organization focused on advancing the interests of Afrikaners, a subgroup of the country's white population. President Trump said yesterday that the country is confiscating land and badly mistreating, quote, certain classes of people. A new law grants the South African government broad powers to confiscate land without compensation. The law states that land may be taken when it is deemed just and equitable. South Africa defended itself today against attacks on the policy made by Trump and Elon Musk. South Africa's president issued a statement saying the government had not confiscated any land. He said he looked forward to engaging with Trump to foster a better understanding over the matter. People in Israel gathered to thank President Trump for helping to release hostages who were held in the Gaza Strip. This comes as talks for the second phase of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas were set to begin today. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
People gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv on Monday, holding a banner that said, "Thank you, President Trump. Our hope rests with you." The cousin of a hostage who was recently released from Hamas captivity shared her thoughts.
We are so happy to have him home, and we want everybody, all the families, to feel how we feel today. And we know now what a nightmare he's been through.
Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is currently in D.C. with plans to meet with Trump. Before flying to the U.S., Netanyahu outlined what they would talk about.
This meeting will deal with important issues, critical issues facing Israel and our region, a victory over Hamas, achieving the release of all our hostages, and dealing with the Iranian terror axis and all its components, an axis that threatens the peace of Israel, the Middle East, and the entire world.
This comes as talks for the second phase of the hostage deal were set to begin on Monday. However, the Prime Minister of Qatar, which has been mediating the talks, said they have not yet begun.
There is nothing yet clear about where are the delegations will come and when it's going to take place, but at least over the phone these discussions has started. And we hope that we start to see some movement in the next few days.
Phase 2 of the ceasefire deal will be much more encompassing than the first. Phase 2 calls for the release of all remaining hostages, a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. This comes as Israel's ceasefire with Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon could be hanging by a thread after terrorists recently attempted to launch drones, also known as UAVs, towards Israel. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, gave a warning to Hezbollah and the Lebanese government.
Israel will not tolerate the launching of UAVs from Lebanon. We will not allow the return of an October 7th reality. We will thwart threats and will respond with full force. There will either be no UAVs or there will be no Hezbollah.
According to Israel's ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah, Israeli forces were supposed to withdraw from Lebanon in January, but that has been extended to February 18th. Jason Perry, NTD News.
President Trump is floating an idea for how to make sure Ukraine will repay the money the U.S. has sent. That says President Volodymyr Zelensky says most of the aid hasn't actually reached his country. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the Ukraine update.
President Trump on Monday saying Ukraine should come up with a guarantee for the money and support the U.S. has sent. Trump suggests Ukraine's rare earth minerals could serve as a compensation for Washington's financial support.
There are billions and billions of dollars below. So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
Also on Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Kyiv received less than half of the money allocated by Congress. U.S. lawmakers approved of $177 billion worth of aid for Ukraine. Zelensky now says Ukraine received only around $75 billion of that.
When they say that Ukraine received $200 billion for support of its army during the war, this is not true. I don't know where all this money is. Maybe this is true on paper.
And discussions about ending the Russia-Ukraine war are increasing. Multiple parties are trying to get a ceasefire deal in the years-long conflict. On Sunday night, President Trump suggested he might be getting closer to actually starting negotiations.
We have meetings and talks scheduled with various parties, including Ukraine and Russia.
The Kremlin on Monday confirmed that a meeting might be on its way, but didn't give any details.
Apparently, the contacts are being planned. We also have a process of planning. As of yet, we have nothing new to say.
Meanwhile, in Europe, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met the British Prime Minister on Monday. Rutte says NATO wouldn't be able to defend Europe without the help of the US. That's because of the many hostile countries which could pose a threat.
It is a geopolitical thing which is going on. The US realizes that, the European side of NATO realizes that. It is China, North Korea, Iran, all getting connected to Russia.
And in Moscow on Monday, a pro-Russia paramilitary fighter is dead after an explosion in an apartment building. Armen Sarkisyan was the founder of a volunteer battalion fighting in Ukraine. Russia law enforcement reportedly say the explosion was a planned assassination and that they're investigating it. Russian authorities did not mention Ukraine in their statements. Ukrainian authorities also have not yet commented. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
Coming up, President Trump pauses tariffs on Mexico and Canada while tariffs on China are still in force. An analyst joins us to dive into potential impacts on foreign relations. And what do everyday Americans think about President Trump's tariff strategy? We'll hear from folks in D.C. after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. President Trump signed an executive order creating a sovereign wealth fund within the next year. Details about the fund remain unclear, but Trump said it could potentially buy social media app TikTok. Elon Musk said Trump has agreed to shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, as part of the plan to cut wasteful government spending. USAID staffers were told to stay out of the agency's headquarters, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio took over as acting chief. Secretary Rubio began his visit to Central America in El Salvador. He pressed the government there to crack down on illegal immigration and warned Panama to reduce China's presence at the Panama Canal. President Trump said he reached an agreement with Mexico and Canada to pause tariffs for a month. America's two neighbors will send personnel to the border to stop drug trafficking. Meanwhile, Trump's 10% tariffs on China came into effect. Joining us now to discuss Trump's tariff strategy and potential impacts is Anders Core, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and Principle at Core Analytics. Anders, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. To begin, now that President Trump has brought both Canada and Mexico to the negotiating table, do you expect to see a new USMCA agreement soon?
It's possible. I'm not sure that Trump necessarily wants to delve deeper into free trade. If he does, he's going. I see him looking more at bilateral agreements in which the Canada and Mexico, other countries that have big deficits, trade deficits with the United States, purchase more U.S. goods essentially.
And how do you see China responding as Canada and Mexico start to make agreements with the U.S., especially on the issue of fentanyl, which is linked to Beijing?
China is, again, like the first administration where they agreed a $200 billion deal. There was at one point there was talk about a $1 trillion deal. I'm not sure if that happened, but China is trying to get back to that 2020 agreement. And of course, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I'm not sure Trump is going to fall for the same shindig again.
And expanding on that, what is your expectation of Trump's strategy here when it comes to these tariffs on China?
I think he wants to, the 10% additional tariffs on top of the 25% that have existed since the first Trump administration are really focused on the fentanyl issue, trying to get China to decrease the precursors that it sends to Mexico and Canada, and through which the fentanyl flows into the United States that kills 70,000 Americans every year. So, that's his strategy. I think he's going to get it. China in the past has been trying to use the fentanyl issue as leverage over the United States and on issues like Taiwan, and that's just unacceptable. It's basically saying we're going to keep killing 70,000 Americans unless you give in on Taiwan. I don't think we're putting up with that, and I think these 10% tariffs are part of that plan.
Now, one area being brought up is the de minimis exemption, which was established to help small businesses as it allows goods under $100 to enter the country tariff-free. Now, reports note that it's been taken advantage of by Chinese companies like Shein and Temu, with economists at Nomura Holdings noting these small value shipments accounted for over 1/10 of China's exports to the U.S. What would closing the de minimis exemption mean for companies like Shein and Temu?
Anything under I believe it's $800 can slide in on the de minimis exemption, and it's going to be very hard for Shein and Temu to ship all of those products. Amazon, I think, also will be hit in terms of all of the cheap Chinese products that are coming in through Amazon. So it's going to be very tough for Chinese exporters. I think it's the right move. A lot of fentanyl is being sneaked in via that de minimis exemption. There's reporting by Reuters, for example, about the basically fentanyl precursors being shipped to the United States, then smuggled over the border into Mexico, and then manufactured into fentanyl there, and then smuggled back into the United States. So the de minimis exemption is really important to get rid of if we want to deal with the fentanyl issue.
And what do you make of Trump's strategy of using tariffs as part of his foreign policy ploy? It seems, he got Mexico and Canada to the negotiating table, maybe Panama as well. What do you make of it as a strategy?
I think it's an incredibly smart strategy. The U.S. economy and our imports are our biggest strength, one of our biggest strengths, along with our military power. We just have not used it because we bought into the World Trade Organization, all of the free trade out there, the ideology of just knee-jerk free trade, no matter who it is, Russia, China, even if they're out to get you, trade with them, empower them, enrich them, and they'll build missiles and point them back to us. It doesn't make sense. So I think that, putting an end to that in terms of, and that's exactly what China's going to try to do to get over our 10% tariffs. They're going to take us to the World Trade Organization court. But of course, the WTO isn't operating anymore because we haven't sent our representatives there since the first Trump administration, which I think was also smart. Essentially, that allows us, getting out of the free trade regime, allows us to use the power of our economy in peaceful ways to influence the world in positive ways. For example, on this fentanyl issue or illegal immigration.
Now, expanding on that, President Trump has indicated that these tariffs are a tool to tackle that flow of fentanyl and illegal migration across the borders. But it does look to be working so far, as Canada and Mexico are among those nations making concessions, as well as challenging the BRICS nations. That's the group of countries aiming to topple the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. How do you see his tariff threats impacting these BRICS nations?
I think that's also a very smart move. I mean, the BRICS nations trying to undermine the U.S. dollar is very corrosive of democracy and human rights internationally. The United States has always stood for these two principles. We've been a beacon on a hill on these. We've held the moral high ground, and targeting BRICS nations that are trying to undermine that. And of course, the U.S. dollar as an international medium of trade is very important to the sanctions regime, sanctioning countries that have human rights abuses or whatnot. So to undermine the U.S. dollar as a medium of international trade will directly undermine our ability to sanction other countries, which will directly undermine human rights all across the world.
Anders Kaur, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
From allied neighbors to a communist regime on the other side of the world, how are everyday Americans reacting to Trump's tariff strategy? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from them.
I was happy to hear about it. Mexico caved. Canada's next. Well, I guess I'm in favor of it just because the trade agreements have been so one-sided.
I don't understand why we are going to impose tariffs on our friendly allied neighbors, our largest trading partners. They're going to put the same tariffs back on us, so it's going to be a net neutral effect.
At this point, I don't know how good that's going to work, but I think it's going to get into a discussion with Canada and Mexico and China.
China is the number one enemy, militarily, politically, socially. They're communists, and we need to be strong with them, against them. And I think Trump will probably do okay.
The administration's argument is that the tariffs can potentially offset the national debt and also bring manufacturers back home. So do you think there's merit to that argument?
I do believe there's merit to that argument. I think it will, if people want to avoid tariffs or companies want to avoid tariffs, yeah, they'll come back to the United States and build their product here.
Economics is not an exact science, okay? A lot of politics are involved. So more than likely, down the road, things will get better. They can't get any worse, believe me.
I don't think that's a tried and true practice. I don't see where all the additional revenue is going to come back to the federal government. On the backs of the consumers.
I think as we kind of equalize the trade deficits and the differences between the countries and what we're sending in and sending out, I think it'll kind of equal itself out at a certain point.
A lot of people are concerned about prices going up, the prices of goods. So are you one of those people who share that concern?
Early on, prices may go up a little, but the bottom line is these countries have to treat us democratically the way we treat them. And there may be a short rise in prices, but they'll come down sooner or later.
Well, fortunately, I'm of economic means that the grocery prices aren't going to affect me that much. It bothers me that prices are going to go up for people that can barely afford to sustain themselves today.
Prices have always gone up. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and gases went from 50 cents a gallon to $4 a gallon. So whether the tariffs or not, things are going to go up.
This is money that we haven't been getting from these countries. I'm hoping it works, just to, get a little discussion going, and maybe they'll figure it out that way.
I mean, there is an element of that. I mean, especially with business, my company will feel a little bit of that, but I think it's more of a short-term pain than a long-term pain.
And for more in-depth analysis on how Trump's tariff policies with Mexico and Canada will play out, tune into NTD's Capital Report with Steve Lance to hear from Trump's former Deputy Assistant for Domestic Policy at 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on NTD. Coming up in the NBA, one of the biggest trades in league history has the sports world abuzz. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And in an unexpected move, Joe Biden signs with Hollywood's Creative Artists Agency. Find out more about this new partnership after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In a shift from politics to Hollywood, former President Joe Biden has signed with Hollywood talent company Creative Artists Agency. This is a reunion of sorts for Biden. He was a client at the agency from 2017 to 2020 and between his 8-year term as vice president and taking office as president. The agency says it's honored to partner with him again. The co-chair of CAA praised the former president for his decades of public service, optimism, and dignity. When Biden was with CAA before, he published his memoir, Promise Me, Dad, and launched a nationwide tour to talk about the book. Biden's former boss, former President Barack Obama, is also represented at CAA. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, especially in the NBA. So let's start there, as a blockbuster trade has sent Luka Doncic to the Lakers. Did the Mavericks cite a reason for trading him?
Not specifically him, but they stressed building culture, and they said they believe defense wins championships. Now, the main player they're getting in return here, Anthony Davis, is maybe the best two-way player in the league, offensively and defensively. Now, the only issue, though, he's 31. Doncic, meanwhile, he's 25. Now, Doncic, a great offensive player, probably the best offensive player in the game. He led the league in scoring last year. He's always among the league leaders, also in assists and rebounds, too. Pairing him with LeBron James, I think is going to be very interesting. Both are great at passing. The Lakers are certainly going to need some defensive help. And, maybe they have some more trades in the works. We'll have to see. Dallas, meanwhile, they've got a team that's built to win now. Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving there together. In any case, though, this trade was a stunner. Both Doncic and Davis are major stars. Rarely do you see, this much star power in one deal, let alone both those guys in there. I'm still stunned. So, what a deal here.
Well, elsewhere in the league, the Sacramento Kings are reportedly trading guard De'Aaron Fox to the San Antonio Spurs, while Chicago is sending guard Zach LaVine to Sacramento in a 3-team trade. What would Chicago get in all of this?
The main thing they get back is their own first-round pick, this summer's draft that they had previously traded away. Now, that could be pretty big because they're already not looking like a playoff-bound team, and losing LaVine is not going to help that at all. Now, the Spurs would get an all-star in Fox to pair with Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul. The Kings then replace Fox with another all-star in Zach LaVine. This is actually pretty big news if true. Neither team is actually confirmed, though. Had it not been for the previous blockbuster, this would be a blockbuster. We'll call this a mini blockbuster. How about that? Now, the NBA's trade bid deadline is February 6th, so that's Thursday this week. There could still be more deals out there. Jimmy Butler is still in Miami, and he's been rumored to be going somewhere, but he hasn't gone there yet. Anyway, we'll continue to follow how this trade deadline goes. I think it's going to have more deals coming up.
Well, moving to alpine skiing news, 40-year-old Lindsey Vonn's comeback continues this week with the World Championships. What's been the reaction to her getting back in the slopes at her age?
There's been some surprise and a little bit of criticism, too. I think the big thing isn't just that she's 40. It was that she was retired for nearly 6 years, and she has a new knee. She got knee replacement surgery a while back. I think if she had just continued skiing for the 6 years in between, no one would really be that surprised by her being here. But she's performed well. She's finished in the top 10 in a downhill and a Super G last month. She was the best in her sport, though, if you remember when she retired. 82 World Cup wins. That was the most by any female, although Michaela Schifrin has now passed her. I think she's up to 99 now. But this week is the World Championships, like you said. This is the biggest event in skiing outside of the Olympics, so all eyes are going to be on her to see how she does here.
Shifting gears to the NFL, All-Pro defensive end Myles Garrett has requested a trade out of Cleveland. How big of a surprise is this?
It's not that big of a surprise. I mean, not as surprising as the Doncic trade, of course, because Garrett had made some comments at the end of last year about wanting to know about the team's off-season plans after they finished last in their division. I mean, he's 29. He's still in his prime. In his statement released today, he twice mentioned how much he wanted to win the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the Browns do not seem very close to doing that. They went 3-14 this year. If they decide to do a rebuild, it doesn't seem to fit into Garrett's, Super Bowl timeline. I mean, the NFL, even the best players start to decline at age 30, if not before that. But any team looking to acquire him is likely going to have to give up a lot. I mean, he is the best in the league at getting after the quarterback. He already has 100 sacks before he turned 29. Pretty incredible. If you get him, if you're looking to get him, probably multiple first-round picks. But of course, that's not until the offseason starts, which will be after Super Bowl coming up. So I'll be sure to let you know.
Well, Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.